Lae'zel of Creche is perhaps one of the most divisive companions within Baldur's Gate 3. She is rude, hostile, and pragmatic. She can be perceived as abusive, dogmatic, and rigid. These traits aren't bad writing. No, they serve as a baseline for her character to evolve from, leading to one of, in my opinion, best character arcs available to us within this game. Because she is the way she is from the start, many fail to give her the chance, and few players actually grasp that Lae'zel, despite being a Githyanki, is far more human and comparable to real people than perhaps any other companion in this game. Today we'll be doing a deep analysis from a writing perspective on Lae'zel as we look at her character, her various branching pathways that she can take, the transformation that she can undergo, her goals, motivations, her trauma, ending, romance, and by the end of this video, I hope to present you, dear viewer, a different perspective on this character. I'll offer some critique on what could have been done better from a writing lens, and using my decade of screenwriting experience, we'll look at the behind the scenes of each scene, and look at why Larian wrote Lae'zel the way they did. If you folks love this kind of content, you can let me know by leaving a comment and a like. I fully plan to continue this content, so consider subscribing, as I'm trying to hit 500 subscribers, and becoming a YouTube affiliate member would be honestly really cool and extremely unexpected. Also, I'd like to thank Orpheus Gaming again for posting a 2-hour-long video of almost all of Lae'zel's scenes, including both Vlaakith and Orpheus timeline. With the premise stated, let's not waste any more time and begin the analysis. The very first time that we meet Lae'zel is aboard the Nautiloid. She is the first companion we meet in the entire game, along with being in the cinematic opening trailer. Before we even get into her dialogue, let's address something extremely important here. A rule that we're going to call the I'm first rule. This is a principle rooted in psychology where the first person you usually meet or see, usually in a crowded room, is typically the person that you're going to gravitate towards. If I know a face more than any other face in a big room, I feel, if even a little, slightly more comfortable. Or so the rule goes. Tutorial characters are typically the first characters that we meet in any RPG game, and usually they either die off like Trask from Knights of the Old Republic, or they end up being extremely boring, and after you find a more interesting character, you never actually use the tutorial character again. Think of someone like Jacob from Mass Effect 2, or James Vega from Mass Effect 3. In the case of Lae'zel, she breaks this mold just a little bit, but as I stated at the start, some players hate her, and she does end up getting left behind in camp, if not, of course, dead. Lae'zel, unlike the other characters I mentioned, is not human and isn't a particularly good baseline character in regards to her morality or human qualities. And we find that out from literally the first time that we meet her. Lae'zel, as mentioned, appears in the opening cinematic and is locked up in a mind flayer pod in the same chamber too. We see Lae'zel looking fearfully at a tadpole that gets inserted into her eye. An attack then ensues, and when our character awakes, Lae'zel has managed to escape and walks away from our pod to take a look outside where she sees a horde of imps flying her way. The last shot we see of Lae'zel is a face of fear. The next time that we meet her is in-game now, where she'll do a cool flip over us and land, her sword pointed right at us as she threatens that this is it, we've met our end. But wait, our tadpole connects us and shows Lae'zel that we aren't a thrall, and she quickly forms an alliance with us. She informs the player that we've been infected with a mind flayer tadpole, and if left untreated will not only consume us, but it will turn us into mind flayers. She then immediately takes charge of the situation, devising a plan that we must escape before turning to face the imps, rushing into combat fearlessly. Alright, as far as intros goes, we've got a little bit to work with right from the jump. From the cinematic opening, I want to highlight a few character details that we learn from her actions and lack of actions. This is going to help us begin to form a base for who Lae'zel is and what kind of person she is as well. I mentioned that Lae'zel appears scared in the opening. Twice, in fact. This is important because right from the jump, she shows vulnerability. It's also important to notice that Lae'zel is alone, or practically alone, for both her insertion and when she sees the imps. No one is actually around her to see her fear. Now, that's a bit of a contrast to the woman that we just saw flipping over in the air, threatening us and devising a plan in the heat of the moment and charging into battle against the same imps that she just saw a moment ago. So why is Lae'zel suddenly not scared? Well, it's not that she isn't scared, but as we continue, we'll come back and build more on this point. Just keep in mind how quick she was to go from fearful to confident. We also see that Lae'zel is not the kind of person to willingly go out of her way to help others. Later on, she obviously advocates for leaving Shadowheart, but she also chose to leave us, the player, behind. Our eyes were wide open, and she looked at us and left. This gives us at least some sort of direction into the morality of who Lae'zel is and breaks that earlier point I made too about tutorial characters being these goody two-shoes. If she was a throwaway baseline character, she'd have saved us, and that's how we begin the game, but she doesn't. And not because she couldn't, but rather she just didn't want to. She made a choice, and again, we will come back to this when we have a bit more to talk about, but again, keep this point in mind as well. One last thing we get from this dialogue, albeit the player might not even have picked up on this as a major piece of info, is the fact that Lae'zel mentions Vlaakith for the very first time, citing that she's been blessed. Again, if you're a new player and have no idea on any of the D&D lore, we probably don't even know who Vlaakith is, and presume it's some sort of god or goddess of some sort. But just wanted to point this out, that in an extremely high, tense, and scary situation for Lae'zel, she thanks Vlaakith here. The next scene we get with Lae'zel is when we find Shadowheart. Despite Shadowheart pleading for help, Lae'zel will suggest to the player to leave Shadowheart behind, asking if the player is willing to die for a stranger. This is a very consistent question and an extremely consistent reaction, as again, Lae'zel chose to leave you behind. We start to get a bit of a better understanding that Lae'zel is not very empathetic and is extremely selfish. She doesn't seem to have much of a care for others. We get some more context if we choose to save Shadowheart here, where Shadowheart says that Gith have a problem with everyone. This again tracks with the behavior that we've seen thus far. Lae'zel is a no-nonsense, pragmatic warrior, or so it seems. We push on to the final area within the Nautiloid as again, Lae'zel takes charge, informing the player that the party's main focus should be escape, and that they deal with the Mind Flayer after the party escapes. After? Interesting. Let's come back to this point as well just a bit later once we get to know Lae'zel slightly better, but her saying after they escape seems like a very reasonable thing to say, but later won't actually match up quite so well as to how Lae'zel established who she is and her goals. And that's basically her character intro. The Nautiloid crash occurs, and when we wake up, Lae'zel is gone. Now, as far as intros go, the biggest thing we can summarize in regards to what we learned about Lae'zel is that she is selfish and an extremely aggressive person. Those two qualities shine through the most because of her actions. She left you to die. She wanted to leave Shadowheart to die. She took charge right away. Her intro isn't the standard tutorial character that intro players might have expected, which is good, but from the jump, it's fairly easy to see why Lae'zel can come off extremely unreasonable and turn a lot of players away. But I want us to remember that we also saw Lae'zel scared, fearful. Again, we'll come back to that soon. The next time that we can meet Lae'zel is when we find her captured by Demeus and Nemessa. It appears that Lae'zel stepped onto a trap of sorts, and with no way to free herself, uses the tadpole to communicate with us. She asks us to get rid of them, and it's up to us on how. Lae'zel doesn't care if we kill them or spare them, but once we get her down, she chastises us for gawking, and doesn't offer thanks, and instead immediately commands us to join her as she looks to journey to a Creche, citing that protocol states a Gith must report there for purification. Lae'zel leaves us with a final piece to go on, citing that she had overheard a tiefling named Zorru, having more information possibly on some sightings of Githyanki in the area. She demands that we go see him at once. And with that, should the player choose, Lae'zel officially joins the party. Alright, so we have a bit more to go on. Lae'zel continues her attitude-laden approach by refusing to thank the player and then demanding they come with her to this Creche. It's extremely hypocritical too that she's demanding us to save her life when, reminder, she left us to die. Does Lae'zel acknowledge this? No, she does not. What's more is that despite being saved from a position of weakness, the moment that she's free, she assumes control once more and places herself as the shot caller. If I remember correctly, this even pissed me off in my first playthrough, and definitely pissed my girlfriend off on her playthrough of this game. What an asshole is probably what the player would be thinking by this time. It doesn't take a lot to get a person to know if they don't like you. Usually within the first 4 to 5 minutes of meeting someone, you'll know if this person is your kind of person. For Lae'zel, nearly 90% of what we've seen so far has been negative personality traits, and now hypocrisy can be added to that list. Now these are not bad in regards to writing, in fact, quite the opposite. Do you guys remember my Will analysis video? Well, Will is a great guy and exudes no real negative traits, and yet I thought he was the worst written character in the game. Negative traits make for more interesting characters. And do you know why? Because no person is perfect. Why does the trope of opposites attract or I can fix her exist? Because we sort of magnetize towards what pushes us away, as odd as that may sound. Negative people tend to cause problems and drama, and most people, so long as it doesn't affect them, love to watch the drama unfold. In regards to Lae'zel, some players see this outwardly negative person and look to be just as negative back. Forget her, leave her at camp, some might say. Others might have their interest piqued, however, that there might be more to this person. And even then, some might just simply be curious. What happened to you? Why are you so cruel? In my eyes, doubling down on this approach for Lae'zel in the beginning is awesome, as it sets up her flaws as a person, and the contradiction and hypocrisy are excellent subtext. If Lae'zel is so awesome and strong, how did she get caught in this trap? If she's so powerful, why does she demand you come with her to the Creche? If she hates mind flayers, why did she use the tadpole to talk to you? These questions, plus the question earlier of why she was so afraid, are a really good foil for what we're seeing early on here. She talks a big game and acts like a big boss. But is she really? Let's handle a few scenes next. Upon the first long rest that you take, you can talk to Lae'zel further. Again, she'll criticize you for wasting time on long resting, and warns us that each minute wasted is another minute closer to ceremorphosis. She reminds the player that they must locate a Creche, and offers to stand watch, threatening to kill us at the first sign of us turning. We also get the chance to speak with her more in the morning. We can ask Lae'zel, if you're a Gith, what Creche she hails from, to which she'll inform us of her home, Creche. She says that she knows very little of this place, Faerun. We also can ask Lae'zel about the process of ceremorphosis, and what she describes is almost too rehearsed in detail, almost as if she's repeating a story she'd once heard as a child. She'll also notate here that she is puzzled that nothing has happened yet in regards to our symptoms. We tell her that this is great news, but she reminds us that this could lead to far worse surprises. From these two dialogues, we get a bit more from the first set. Lae'zel's fear of ceremorphosis is evident, but unlike in the intro of the game, her fear is expressed more in anger, as she disagrees with resting. Her offering to stand watch is a noble one, however, I sense a bit of projection from Lae'zel regarding her own fears, but still, she is really holding her cards close to her chest and is playing extreme hardball on opening up to the player character. She doesn't want to wait because she fears turning into a mind flayer, but she would never say that, and that's why she gets angry when you decide to long rest. Let's move on. Let's say the next thing you do is go speak with this Zorru. We get some interesting interaction from Lae'zel here. Upon meeting Zorru, Lae'zel tells him to bow, and if we go along with it, she'll tell Zorru to bow even lower. Lae'zel then takes charge once again and demands to know where Zorru saw the other Githyanki, and he points it out on her map. Lae'zel then lets Zorru go before turning to us. She informs us that the locals here are compliant before calling the tiefling a tiefling. We can correct her, and she'll offer an eye roll of sorts, telling us that she's unfamiliar with the customs. Finally, we can ask her about what purification actually is, to which she'll name drop the Zaithis, but reveal that she doesn't know much more on what it entails. This is a fantastic scene, and again tracks really well with what we already know about Lae'zel. She again takes control of the situation and is extremely direct and to the point, and will once more reiterate the importance of getting to the Creche. Lae'zel, if you let her, handles all of this by herself here, and it's safe to say she gets the job done. But we knew all of these qualities already. We've seen this in other scenes. What we get from this scene also helps shape the more humane side of Lae'zel, her face without a mask, so to speak. Earlier I mentioned we'd return to a few points, but that I wanted to wait until we had a bit of a larger sample size. Well, I think we can introduce those points back in now. Now, I mentioned Lae'zel wearing a mask just a second ago. I think we all know the phrase or what it means when someone says that you're wearing a mask. You might have heard the Japanese adage that all people wear 3 masks. The first layer is the one we display to the public. The next layer is the one shown to close family and friends. But the final layer is your true self. Only you see this mask. I mentioned just a few scenes back how hypocritical Lae'zel comes off. She got caught in this cage and yet acts like she's this deadly warrior. She left you to die, but then asks you for help. When Lae'zel was alone, she was genuinely scared. But the moment that she finds you, and every moment after, she acts tough and calm. She acts like this despite knowing what having this tadpole in her eye means. And now, this scene here gives us a real glance behind Lae'zel's mask. Firstly, her asking Zorru to bow goes completely against her frontal attitude. The Lae'zel we know from the few interactions would have got straight to the point and demanded to know where her kin were. So why does she have Zorru bow? It couldn't be because she's just trying to show off to the party, right? Perhaps she's just trying to instill some confidence back into herself. Maybe she misses home and this is a reminder of how powerful the Githyanki are. It's all speculation, but to this point, Lae'zel has been all talk, and after getting herself captured, Maybe this is her trying to reassert herself as this, indeed, strong warrior. Moments later, we correct Lae'zel in her pronunciation of tiefling, and she rolls her eyes. This is kind of the first comedic thing that she's done, and obviously she doesn't mean to come off funny, but this was needed. This small thing adds a bit of layer to her character, and that's a really good thing. I also want to note her excuse here that she refuses to call it culture and states that she's unfamiliar with the customs here. She refuses to correct herself, but instead brushes off the customs as almost beneath her to know, and demands the player teach her matters of Faerun. When we correct her, she brushes off that correction as well. Again, this is a funny moment, and it means that beneath this layer of selfish arrogance lies someone who can display fear and annoyance and indirectly come off a bit funny. Now, all this being said, every chance Lae'zel has had to take any ownership for a mistake or the chance to bond with you or her allies thus far, she's practically refused. Her development at this stage is clearly someone being extremely defensive and using her pragmatism as that defensive tool. Like I said, a really great set of characteristics for a character arc here, if Larian chooses to build off of it. Let's move on to her next scene, and again, depending on the player choice, this might come slightly later, but let's assume you've taken enough long rest for this scene to occur, and man, it's a big one. When the player character has taken a few more long rests, they'll get a scene that shows them bumbling to a practice dummy before sitting down. It's clear that the effects of ceremorphosis are setting in, and suddenly, from the shadows, leaps Lae'zel as she puts a blade right to her throat. Lae'zel tells us that the party is lost, that the effects of the tadpole are being felt by her, and that she can see us being affected by it. She tells us that she'll start by killing us, then the rest of the party, then herself. Lae'zel means to kill everyone to prevent us from transforming into mind flayers. And then our tadpoles connect, again. The narrator tells us that we sense both uncertainty and disgust. Depending on the player choice, a few things can happen. Obviously, you can let Lae'zel kill you and then possibly kill everyone else too. You also can choose to attack her yourself and permanently kill her. Obviously, either of these options leads to game overs or the end of her story. You also have the chance to persuade her or pass a medicine check, and if you succeed, she'll say that she can't trust her own mind, so she'll have to trust yours. If you deception check her, she'll hand you the blade and then compliment you for the clever ruse. Well, all of that's well and good, and these options all tell us a bit, but let's explore the best narrative option that hands us the most information, which is using the tadpole. When we peek into Lae'zel's mind, we get a huge glimpse into the human behind the mask. In fact, this is the first real glimpse at the human behind the mask. We learn that Lae'zel is afraid, and not of death, no, but of insignificance. We then get more as we learn that she fears being a failure to her kind, dying without fulfilling her dream of holding a silver sword atop a red dragon, and dying, forever being unknown to Vlaakith. With that, Lae'zel can be told that she will bring honor to her queen, and Lae'zel will back off, stating that she won't let the Mind Flayer tadpole take her. Wow. Amazing stuff. Let's dissect this scene. Okay, so this is a massive revelation. All the time that Larian has invested so far into Lae'zel has been into building her up as this distant, almost unbreakable warrior. Her pragmatism is on full display here. She is literally willing to kill everyone to prevent a sect of mind flayers being born. Her ruthlessness and magnetism towards her duty to Vlaakith is what leads her to make this decision so easily, but it's her fear that allows her to second guess herself and walk away. You know, if we take what we know about Lae'zel thus far, we know that she hates mind flayers. Look at her tent, for example. What do we see proudly displayed? The head of a mind flayer doll, and a training dummy on the other side made it look like a mind flayer too, of which she is constantly training on that said dummy. She also knows a lot about the mind flayer transformation, and again, she is willing to kill everyone to stop us from becoming mind flayers. It's obvious even at this point that this is her primary fixation. Some would call this her outer goal. I wouldn't go that far because her primary goal is getting to the Creche, but you get my point. For Lae'zel to walk away from this entire endeavor is a contradictor of those outer goals, and Larian makes the anchor for her backing out of this option probably the best anchor it could be. Inner struggle. Yes, that's fantastic setup. It's like when you have a bully in a story, right? If the bully is just a bully to be a bully, then what a boring character that is. But, as is common, the bully usually has some sort of deeper reason as to why they bully. Maybe their father or mother bullied them. Maybe they feel powerless out of school. Finding out why someone does something and relating it to human struggle is an extremely basic and very human tool in writing. In Lae'zel's case, we miss out a lot if we don't pry into her mind. If we don't pry, we don't get to understand that Lae'zel is scared, just like she was on the ship. Yeah, she's a tough warrior sworn to her duty, but not only do we get an idea as to why that duty matters to her, to be remembered by Vlaakith and become a Red Dragon Rider, but we also get a real inner struggle showcased to us. Lae'zel has a fear of being insignificant, a failure to her kind, and being unknown to her queen Vlaakith. Wow, it's a pretty large and existential fear that she has, but this scene shows us that there is more to Lae'zel than just the surface. More to her behind that mask. It's part of the reason that she takes charge, part of the reason she charges into battle, part of the reason that she's so willing to kill everyone, including herself. It is her duty, but she doesn't like it. I think this is just excellent, and if everything before was a prologue for Lae'zel's character story, then this scene is a small turning point that carries us into her first act. This is awesome stuff. Let's dive into the next scenes. The next scene we're going to cover is the start of Lae'zel's romance, which is yet another new angle that the player is introduced to. A really new angle. Lae'zel comes onto the player using some pretty romantic poetry to express how not only has the player character earned her respect, but her desire. If you decide to play dumb, Lae'zel will just spell it out for you that she is interested in you for sex. If you accept her advances, she'll then say that one night soon, she'll come to take what's hers. Again, this throttled me when I first played this game, as just like the last scene, this scene shows a whole different side of Lae'zel that, honestly, I wasn't sure she had. Her approach here of telling you that she wants you is extremely straightforward, but as previously established, that's within Lae'zel's character, so I won't dock that a point here. I do, however, have a slight problem with Lae'zel's reasons. She claims that you excite her, and seeing you in combat has proven her wrong. You're not witless, gutless, nor unimpressively bland as she states. She instead says that you've gained her respect, and what's more, we've gained her yearning. For a character who thus far has been extremely closed off and slowly revealing moments of herself, to me this is a bit quick. If she was interested only in sleeping together, I suppose her entire speech to you does only touch on physical attraction being there. But the way that she words it comes off extremely thoughtful, and almost a little bit obsessive. It's a little confusing to me, but I won't slight this too much. I just felt that her intentions matched her character thus far, but this time her words didn't really match what she was saying. It's like the in-character correct thing to do, and I use correct only in reference to who she is at this point in the story, would be to only desire us physically, but her words get ahead of her a bit and blur the line. The part of her saying, taking what's mine and claiming you, however, fits very well for her, and while I have an issue with the wording and how expressive she is, I can also admit that her approach to the player is unlike anyone else in your party. She is the most open in her approach, and next to Minthara is the most possessive too. This introduction into her romance, if nothing else, does serve to be an eyebrow lifter for some players. Even if a player hates Lae'zel by this point, she might still like the player, and you may get this scene, to which I'm sure even those players thought, wow, I didn't expect this from Lae'zel. We'll come back to this romance plotline, but as far as bases go, we've got an extremely solid start. Lae'zel sees us as nothing more than pleasure, nothing more than an object to be claimed. Slowly, we get the chance to ask Lae'zel more about herself and the Githyanki people. We can ask her why, if she respects us, is she still so rude? And Lae'zel, being as upfront as she is, doesn't reject your claim of her being rude, but rather calmly explains why, which is a bit unexpected. I expected her to chastise us for even suggesting the thought of her being rude or denying it, but no, she actually explains it pretty well. Lae'zel explains that all the bruises she's inflicted and blood that she's shed, she's done for Vlaakith and in Vlaakith's name. She cites that Vlaakith requires everything from her children, and Lae'zel only knows blood red and death black, that her mind is silver and her body steel. Essentially, what she's saying is that she's a sword for Vlaakith. Lae'zel's last line here is very poetic and very well said. She finishes her explanation by saying that, quote, I am what I must be, say what I must be, to survive every beast I face and every wound I bear. Something that should be extremely clear by this point is that Lae'zel knows her goals. She thinks she knows herself. She is extremely confident in her belief in Vlaakith and utterly convinced that she is that metaphorical sword for her queen. In layman's terms, that last line is stating that through Vlaakith and the teaching she's inherited, She is rude because it's what will help her survive and ascend. She knows no other way, as she's never seen another methodology of living her life. It's incredibly wise of her, and the way that she delivers this line, as I said, poetically, comes off great. It would have been rather boring if she had said, "I have to be tough to survive," which is practically what she's saying. But her incorporating where that sense of living comes from and her wording of it comes off both very unique to her and shows us the reason behind her entire existence: to live for Vlaakith. Larian is setting another spring in her arc here. The way Lae'zel is living now is the only way she knows how. There is nothing else, nor can there be. I think having Lae'zel not only openly state her reasons, but also being so self-aware of why she is the way she is smart. And it makes sense because Lae'zel is a seriously devoted follower of Vlaakith. Larian could have taken a route where Lae'zel has no idea what Tav is talking about, and perhaps her arc is finding the error of her ways in her life and rebuking Vlaakith for making her so cruel. And while that is an arc, it's not the one that fits her exactly. Now, they do kind of take an approach like this, but again, not this sort of approach. Lae'zel has shown to be a very introspective person thus far, understanding her goals and motivations, so we the players certainly shouldn't be the one to motivate her or show her why her goals matter. It actually really benefits her overall story, as you'll soon see if Lae'zel is extremely grounded and rooted in her dogma. She has lived her life with this doctrine, and she shows no hesitation here when asked about her rudeness. She is proud of her path in life and just hopes to be one of Vlaakith's champions through her teachings. Her being so firm in this actually sets us up fantastically for later parts in her story. I want to analyze Lae'zel's approach here for a moment and how she approaches something that we as humans view as a sensitive and intimate moment. Lae'zel views this interaction extremely casually and almost like a game. From the first moment, she states that we will follow. She will lead, but when we arrive, we can tell her to submit to us rather than us submitting to her. And we only need to pass an intimidation check, which should say something. Again, Lae'zel likes when we, the player, are aggressive and take charge, and oftentimes approves of these actions that we take that follow those traits. It's no different here. Also, as odd as it is dissecting a romance scene, I do want to point out that Lae'zel pleasures both you and herself. If Lae'zel was as selfish and detached as she appears, she would have been more likely to simply get pleasure from the player, and then, once she'd gotten what she had needed, leave. This doesn't happen, and her being concerned enough to reciprocate says something about her character. That she not only has a heart, but that she at least cares enough to provide you something in return. Yes, she takes charge, yes, she's demanding, but as far as I can presume, you both had a happy night. It's worth noting that if you ask Lae'zel to stay a bit longer, she states that time for pleasure has passed, and she distances herself from you again. As odd as it was analyzing a romance scene, I hope my point was proven. You can tell a lot about someone and how they choose to be intimate with someone else. We learned that Lae'zel likes to lead, but is also willing to be led, along with that she has some care for her partner, and deep down, a heart that is willing to do things that don't directly benefit her. But despite that, she wants to dominate you, and make sure to distance herself from any strings. For now, you're just an object. Let's move on to one of the last romance scenes in a while. And not to make this video a Lae'zel romance review either, but truly a lot of her romance early on can occur well before her next major event, since most players avoid the Gith Patrol until later on. It also makes sense because out of all the companions barring perhaps Astarion, Lae'zel has the least romantic connection to you and states multiple times that you are nothing to her but an object, so it actually makes a lot of sense as to why things get to move a little bit faster. Even in real life, people are pretty quick to be intimate with each other and have gotten pretty good at hiding who they are on the inside. They're able to separate oftentimes the two parts of themselves. Lae'zel during a long rest after the romance scene will call you out directly for looking at her more often. She calls you a coward and or a fool for trembling when around her. She assumes the reason is because you want to sleep with her again, and tells you to tempt her. Pretty much regardless of what you say outside of refusing her, she'll praise you for being the leader of the group, and she values that. You then can ask Lae'zel if you two can cuddle afterwards, and she'll be confused as to why a quote lesser act sparks a greater desire. This is a real all-or-nothing approach which aligns with the person that we know Lae'zel to be. She settles for nothing but the highest, biggest objectives and goals. Why would she want to cuddle? She calls it a wasted movement, but she does say she'll keep your request in mind if you perform well. Again, this scene is a great line in the sand moment. She doesn't waste time with affection or love, but she does have a heart and she can be a caring person. And that's why I wanted to make sure that we covered all of this romance and all of this setup for Lae'zel. I want us to all be on the same page with what kind of character Larian is presenting to us, and already we can see a deeply layered person appearing. Someone who values their strength and teachings more than anything else. A hypocrite, a ruthless, pragmatic fighter who doesn't have time for anything other than her goals. But behind that rough exterior is someone who has fear. Fear of being a disappointment to her people. A fear of never being known to her queen. A fear of insignificance. It's extremely human despite her being a Gith. And when I say human, I of course am talking about real-life humans. That's a fear that most of us have. Every day of our lives, disappointing our parents, growing up to be failures, hell, her choice to view sex as nothing more than an object is something that tons of people do, and that oftentimes stems from fears of getting close, being hurt, or most of all, fear of being vulnerable. I spent a good chunk of this video building the base around Lae'zel because this game does a good job of having her be herself and dropping hints on her upbringing being tough by our standards. And she herself stated that she is the way she is because she wants to not just survive, but to reach the pinnacle of what her people define as success. It's so clear to us that her established base is, well, established. It's rooted in youth development, lessons, culture, and now she lives what she was taught. This makes what comes next for Lae'zel and her possible story work even better. Let's finally get back to Lae'zel's next story development. If you remember, she needs to get into contact with the Gith patrol that Zorru mentioned. She is looking to get herself and us to a Githyanki Creche so that we can use a Zaithus purification device to cure ourselves of our tadpole. That's her outer goal. Well, we find this Gith patrol, and they show off their strength by slaughtering a bunch of flaming fists, and then a big red dragon lands. Lae'zel thinks it's a good idea to talk to them, and even if we refuse, she runs off to go talk to them without the party. Talk about agency. This woman has a goal, and even if you, the player, decline the quest, her, mechanically of course being a companion, still takes it upon herself to go down and chase her goal. This is also the first time that we get a chance to meet another Githyanki in our entire playthrough. Unless, of course, you went to the mountain pass, but let's assume you've done this first, then with this exposure, we have a direct comparison of these Githyanki that we meet versus Lae'zel. And so far, these Githyanki seem just as hostile as Lae'zel, just as ruthless and just as pragmatic. Lae'zel doesn't bat an eye when we suggest that talking to them might not be such a good idea either. To her, this is just a normal Sunday. This interaction can go a few ways. At the base of it, you either succeed in not fighting the Githyanki, or you have to fight them. How you get there obviously differs on what you say. The core of this interaction has the party meeting Kith'rak Voss, who Lae'zel denotes is fulfilling the same role that she dreams of filling, Vlaakith's silver sword. This is important because Kith'rak Voss will either order Lae'zel and the party's death due to them having the artifact, being disobedient, or being infected. Or Kith'rak will allow you to leave thanks to persuasion or assistance from us, Tav. Lae'zel's response obviously differs slightly, with the more interesting option being that if you let her speak for the party, which, since she's a Gith, kind of seems like the natural thing to do. But if you let Lae'zel speak to Kith'rak and you don't interfere, she'll be honest and tell him that she's been infected by a tadpole and cites the codes she's grown up with on, stating that the Kith'rak must help her. He, however, instead orders her death, to which she protests and a battle ensues. Afterwards, Lae'zel will express anger and confusion. She followed what she was taught, and the Kith'rak, one of the highest ranks that a Githyanki can reach of all people, didn't respect the protocol. She then says that she will kill the Kith'rak and present his head to Vlaakith. I'll break down more of that rant in a moment, but if you manage to convince Voss to let the party go, Lae'zel will acknowledge that the player's intervention most likely saved them a fight, as she knows the Kith'rak would have killed her for the artifact. It's also really important to note that Lae'zel, if you go down this persuasion route, willingly omits that we carry the artifact, and presuming she somehow doesn't know that we have the artifact, she still withholds that she's been infected with a tadpole. Both routes are interesting, even if both conclusions lead Lae'zel to still seek out the Creche. Starting with the peaceful outcome, I find it extremely interesting that Lae'zel goes along with omission of information here because that isn't protocol. So why does she choose to self-omit? It couldn't possibly be because she values her life and the party's, right? She does acknowledge that the Kith'rak would have killed us, so I believe that Lae'zel's action to not take action here is definitely done at least slightly out of fear for her own life, which, if we remember earlier when she was willing to kill the entire party, The tadpole says that Lae'zel doesn't fear death. So something has changed. But what? If you have romanced Lae'zel by this point, you could point to the idea that deep down, she has formed an attachment to the player, and that is what pulls her away from her duty. If you haven't, I find it kind of a hard sell that Lae'zel feels affection towards the party enough to pry her away from Vlaakith's protocol, so this might be a slight on this particular outcome, as we just don't have enough reason barring a romance for why Lae'zel agrees to omit information. The other route is more interesting narratively speaking. If conflict erupts, Lae'zel expresses some confusion, but also some anger as to the Kith'rak of all people not following protocol. She can't understand why, and settles on the idea that the Kith'rak isn't following Vlaakith's commands, and as such, she will present his head to her and earn her queen's favor. Do you remember earlier when I said that Lae'zel really is an all or nothing kind of character? Well, she just committed to killing one of Vlaakith's strongest champions because he didn't follow protocol, and she made the choice fairly quick, using the protocol and a code as a sufficient enough explanation. This harks back to earlier when Lae'zel was asked why she was so rude, and she stated that she has to be because her teachings are what will allow her to survive. Well, a contradiction of those teachings occurred and she nearly died, hence her confusion. This is the first of many warning signs that everything that Lae'zel knows might not all be true. But having her stick to her code here, and honestly, not even question it at this point, is the right call. This code, this protocol, is Lae'zel. It should take a lot more than this interaction to have her doubt it. The next big story scene that we get from Lae'zel can slightly differ, but let's assume that you have made your way to the Underdark and to the Arcane Tower. Through a bit of searching, you'll find a Githyanki slate. When you pick it up, Lae'zel will read it to you and tell the party of a story written on it regarding someone named Orpheus. This is the first time we've heard the name, and when Lae'zel says their name, she says it with hate. She retells the story of Mother Gith, the mother of all Githyanki, traveling to broker a deal to save her people, and as she left, Vlaakith seized the empire for herself. But Mother Gith had a son, Orpheus, who was the true heir, and thus a war broke out for control of the Githyanki empire. Lae'zel detests this, essentially calling it propaganda, and denies this even being in the realm of possibility. If you suggest that it could be true, she threatens to cut off a few of your toes. This scene is the budding plot line that serves as the catalyst for Lae'zel's possible character arc here. At this time, we don't know much about this Orpheus, and so as such, we'll move on. But once again, this scene denotes that Lae'zel has strong beliefs in the protocol and Vlaakith. The next large portion of Lae'zel's story that we're going to dive into here is the Creche. This has been Lae'zel's big outer conflict for the entirety of Act 1, and she has benefited a lot from slow character build-up and even experienced a bit of growth through her romance. Once you reach the Creche, however, this is where her story really begins to advance. As you progress to the Creche, we see at the entrance cultists being rounded up and escapees shot. As we go further, the whole place is on high alert and fairly hostile too. What's interesting here is we get further insight from Lae'zel that compared to her Creche, that this Creche is far friendlier and less remote than her own, giving some insight into more of her upbringing. That says a lot when you consider what we find in the training room, where they are killing the quote-unquote weaklings and training non-stop. Now there are 3 things that we can find in the Creche, each adding to Lae'zel's story and her character arc. Let's first head to the Zaith'isk, the objective that Lae'zel has had from the moment we met her. We'll meet with Gastil, the doctor of the Creche. She'll call for us to enter the Zaith'isk. Either Lae'zel or Tav can enter the Zaith'isk, and if Tav enters, Lae'zel will be pissed, and rightfully so. The outcome obviously is the same, so let's go with the path of Lae'zel using the Zaith'isk here. As mentioned before, this is the moment the party, but especially Lae'zel, has been waiting for, so as she straps herself into the chair, the outcome she expects obviously doesn't happen. As Lae'zel recites the prayers and/or tenets of Vlaakith, being urged to continue doing so by the Gastil, the player, especially if the player is Githyanki, will note that this machine extracts memories and then kills whoever sits in that chair. Now Gastil knows this, and she withheld this from the entire party. So if Tav convinces Lae'zel, or fails to convince her, either way, she'll manage to escape with her life before the Zaith'isk explodes. Lae'zel is furious. I followed protocol. I kept to my faith, is what Lae'zel says, yet can't understand why the Zaith'isk would attempt to kill her. And so, she presumes the device was tampered with, and that there is no other explanation here. She then immediately gives herself a new goal, which is to go and inform the leader of this Creche of the tampering. Okay, mixed feelings here. I like the swerve here regarding the Zaith'isk. Mechanically, it could never have actually cured us since we have so much of the game to go, but Larian could have easily just had it fail. Having it actually be something that kills someone is great. It goes against what Lae'zel was taught, and we begin to see that seemingly she was indoctrinated so deep that even this is not enough to get her to question her beliefs, which I'm fine with, but I wish they gave Tav a bit more chance to argue with Lae'zel here regarding how wrong she might be. She herself doesn't have to show doubt, nor does Larian need to offer a persuasion check or something, but instead just have her double down, seemingly more than ever before does she come off desperate in her doubling down effects. For such a large quest for Lae'zel, I wish a bit more consequence was given here to her. It's a good thing that this Creche is filled with things that can shake Lae'zel, and the next thing we find is yet another Githyanki slate. This slate continues the tale of the renegade Orpheus, retelling the battle that Orpheus had against Vlaakith, how red dragons soared through the sky, and that Kith'rak Voss seemingly defeated Orpheus himself, signaling the end of the prince. Now again, Lae'zel calls this nothing but lies and scoffs it off. We don't get a chance to argue this slate like we did the last either, which again, I wish we did. It's possible that Larian didn't want to expose this Orpheus plot with too much player interaction, so again, I won't dock this too much. We then are granted an audience with Wargaz, the Inquisitor. He knows we have the weapon, and we have come to deliver it to him. He asks us to hand over the weapon, and Lae'zel this time doesn't stay silent like with Voss. She tells us that we must hand it over. We can choose to not hand it over, and Lae'zel will threaten to kill us if we don't. If you did the Zaith'isk, you could remind her of what just happened, and then she'll agree that you're right and be on your side. Small nitpick here, but do we really need to remind her of this? This is the first time I felt like this natural progression of Lae'zel. This was the first time that I feel like this natural progression Lae'zel was making feels a little bit unnatural. I mean, she legitimately has a reason to distrust Wargaz, or at the bare minimum bring up the Zaith'isk herself, but she doesn't, and that's unlike her. In fact, that was her next goal, so the fact she doesn't mention anything is kind of weird. She's a direct, often confrontational person, but this instep by us to her makes her almost seem a little stupid. If we choose to refuse Wargaz, you will then have to fight them, leading to the same cutscene that occurs if you gave them the weapon, which in my opinion is a far more interesting development. When you hand over the Astral Prism, Vlaakith herself appears, and holy smokes is that cool. More on that in a minute. She kneels down, recognizing Lae'zel. She knows her name. Vlaakith says that she can grant purity, something Lae'zel just failed at getting. Vlaakith tells us that inside the artifact lies someone who is corrupting it. She gives Lae'zel a divine task. Kill this person, and not only will she be cleansed, she will ascend. Wow. Before we go any further, let's break this gigantic scene down. Okay, first of all, getting the chance to actually meet Vlaakith, this god that Lae'zel has spent the entire game going on in regards to her majesty, her code, and her protocols, is so good. We spent the early portion of Lae'zel's story building up somewhat of an understanding of Vlaakith and Gith culture through Lae'zel, and we know how important this is. Lae'zel just failed to cleanse herself too, despite following Vlaakith's protocol. It was the same when we met Kith'rak Voss. For Lae'zel here, she's never lost faith in Vlaakith, and Vlaakith appearing here is akin to an angel coming down at the exact moment that she needed. Lae'zel probably feels fully justified in believing in her actions, her choice to follow protocol because her god just showed up and praised her. No, she knew her. Remember earlier when in Lae'zel's mind she said she had a fear of dying and being forgotten, being insignificant, being unknown to her queen? Well, her queen does know her and is willing to help her child by cleansing her and ascending her. What a huge, huge honor that must feel like for Lae'zel. Seeing Lae'zel, so desperate to please Vlaakith, bending the knee to this goddess. I mean, we've never even seen such subservience from Lae'zel. Yes, I get that Vlaakith is important because Lae'zel told us, but to actually meet Vlaakith, to see Lae'zel's devotion and almost desperation to please her queen is a chef's kiss moment. The fact that Lae'zel's inner story is so tightly woven into this entire Creche area, the Prism, and this, I mean, she is definitely lucky that the developers and writers wrote this in, as other characters like Will or Karlach did not get this level of involvement. It helps show us, the player, just how deep Lae'zel's beliefs are. It shows us the core of who Lae'zel is. a devout follower of Vlaakith. She's Vlaakith's sword, and nothing else matters to Lae'zel, and the road that we're on right now shows that. So into the Astral Prism we go, and we wind up in the astral plane. Lae'zel calls it home. The dream visitor speaks to us, saying that only Tav will be allowed to enter, and Lae'zel allows this with no fight. Okay, I do have a gripe with that. A lot, actually. Earlier when I mentioned Lae'zel withholding information from Kith'rak Voss, I called that out as something that seemed a bit out of character for her at that point in her story, but I was willing to pass that off. This? No. Lae'zel should be furious. She must kill the dream visitor. She has to. She just met her queen for the first time in her life, so her motivation to finish this task should be huge. She doesn't attempt to argue or force her way in, and that's honestly what I would have expected her to do at this point in the story. Lae'zel takes charge typically, and if it's in service of her queen, who just showed Lae'zel that following Vlaakith's protocols and commands does reward you and help you survive, then why is she so calm about letting Tav go in? This is stripping the agency away from her, right after we just had a massive scene, and her letting you go sucks a bit of momentum out of the sails. Tav will then get the chance to speak with the Dream Guardian, who informs us that Vlaakith is lying, that she isn't as godlike as she'd have anyone believe. Furthermore, they say that Vlaakith doesn't know how Mother Gith defeated the Illithid Empire, and that if her deception was ever found out, it would cause massive disruption across the Githyanki people. And then, if you attempt to kill the Guardian, or refuse to kill the Guardian, regardless, the Guardian will push you out. Lae'zel's reaction changes slightly depending on what you do, either citing that Vlaakith is all-powerful, or if the player attempted to kill the Guardian, Lae'zel will say that Vlaakith could never condemn her to do something so impossible. Either way, Lae'zel says she'll get Wargaz to resummon Vlaakith so she can report everything back to her queen. The party then will return back to the Creche, and if Wargaz is still alive, hence why I say that this is the better story narrative, he'll betray the party and label Lae'zel a Hasharlak, which I assume means traitor, and calls her a Gaik scum before a fight ensues. After the party defeats the room, Lae'zel cries out, and once again, we're back to the good writing territory. Lae'zel's poetic delivery here is great. What good is this heart of stone, if only to be shattered, is a big line. Earlier, Lae'zel told us that she is rude and stern, because that's how she must be to survive, to ascend. Lae'zel saying how she wielded Vlaakith's fury as a blade and roared her wrath as a dragon is essentially Lae'zel saying that she's lived her life only for Vlaakith. Lae'zel forewent pleasures or her own wants and desires for the sole purpose of putting Vlaakith first. Lae'zel asks, why then is she being punished for doing what she was told to do? Why has her goddess forsaken her? This is a highly traumatic moment, and applause to Larian for approaching this next moment in Lae'zel's story carefully. If this was the moment Lae'zel turns her back on Vlaakith, it would have been fine, but not great. Instead, drawing this plotline out is deepening the inevitable turn that can come, while also protecting Lae'zel's alternate path of staying by Vlaakith's side. We'll cover that point a bit more, but what I want to point out while we're here is the really humane reaction that Lae'zel has to all of this. Her whole life she's essentially been indoctrinated in this almost cult-like mindset. We've seen this in real life where victims are so brainwashed that they have mental breakdowns once they break out because it's like they are stepping into a whole new life, a whole new person. We've also seen victims be unable to see facts, reason, or logic and stand by the cult or their oppressor that just continues to pull them in deeper. In Lae'zel's case, it's pretty clear such a traumatic moment occurring now sets her on the path of the 7 stages of grief. What we see here is simply the first stage, shock. What follows almost immediately after is of course first anger and then denial. It must be a test. Now we the player are almost 100% convinced that Vlaakith is a load of crap, and if you notice, you don't need to pass any checks for the game to tell us that no matter what we did in that prism, Wargaz was going to kill us. I like this because, say you aren't romancing Lae'zel, then seeing her be betrayed by her own people and still being unable to break free of her indoctrination is a great way to draw player empathy. It's almost kind of sad that this great warrior of Lae'zel in this moment is nothing more than a pathetic, scrambling Githyanki. The whole game, we've perhaps hated Lae'zel for being such an asshole, and even a little evil, but this moment is perhaps the first time that we get to see her vulnerable around us. To see her hurt, to see Lae'zel be betrayed by everyone and everything she ever knew. It's hard not to empathize with her, and this can serve to invigorate the player, to help break her out of her thinking. Hence why having her regress back to Vlaakith instead of having her break free is a smart choice. We have to help Lae'zel try and see reality. This is a real highlight for me in her story, and it's awesome. One final thing to note here is that at the moment, Lae'zel doesn't have an outer goal at all, and for the first time, she doesn't know what to do. She always is quick to pivot and go, but this time, she says she'll need some time to think. Again, great work here, Larian. As for inner goals, it's pretty clear that the internal struggle has started with Lae'zel as she begins to weigh what she has learned versus what she knows. Her inner conflict is if she is able to live for herself or if she'll go back to the way she was before, in which case, we have a negative and much more tragic arc. The next time that we long rest, Kith'rak Voss visits us and delivers more exposition to Lae'zel. He not only confirms that the Zaith'isk would have in fact killed her, he drops a bomb that Ascension is a lie and will only lead to her being consumed by Vlaakith. Lastly, he lets us know that something or someone within the prism is in fact the key to Vlaakith's demise, and he asks us to meet him in Baldur's Gate, where he'll introduce us to a person who can help free whatever is inside. Now this is really where Lae'zel's story starts to divide itself. You see, Lae'zel can either stay stuck in denial here and kill Voss, or she can move on and perhaps not fully abandon Vlaakith yet, but enough to bargain with Voss here and hear him out. Either route honestly works here, but let's review the things you'll hear from Lae'zel regardless of which path you took. The main thing we get from Lae'zel is her describing Ascension. She tells us how every Gith from birth dreams of taking a Mind Flayer's head and earning enough favor to ascend to Tu'narath, the home of Vlaakith, to serve her eternally. This was Lae'zel's dream. This is what she was ultimately afraid of when she threatened to kill us at camp. This is what she was afraid she'd never be able to do. This is why she had the Mind Flayer dummies at her tent. This was all Lae'zel ever wanted for herself. You either have tragedy or growth for Lae'zel, depending on the path she takes. If Lae'zel kills Voss, she is reinvigorated. She has killed the traitor and believes this will redeem her in Vlaakith's eyes. Lae'zel is doubling down on the same things that she thought would gain her favor. She shows no change at all and is now making some pretty drastic moves. Killing Voss is a big deal, and she openly admits that the party will have to kill more of her people until they can relay Voss's betrayal to Vlaakith. This is nuts, but it makes sense why. She not only refuses to change, but is willing to commit to these kinds of actions. Lae'zel simply can't betray her ideology. She cannot escape her teachings. They simply can't be wrong. If you suggest Voss could have been telling the truth, Lae'zel outright tells you no. If you suggest that Vlaakith could actually be a tyrant, Lae'zel denies that, stating that Vlaakith is ruthless because she has to be in order to protect the Gith. This route has Lae'zel fall into the bargaining stage of grief, as she looks past all logic or reason. In this route where you spare and listen to Voss, Lae'zel doesn't outright believe him, but instead does allow the possibility that Ascension, the Dream Visitor being the key to her downfall, and Vlaakith's tyranny could all in fact be true. But as she states, she doesn't know nor can she, and that angers her. It could be that she is in the bargaining stage here too, as in this route, Lae'zel allows everything to be both true and untrue, and debates on what if would be best. Lae'zel also drops a really hard line here that she hasn't sinned against Vlaakith, but rather, Vlaakith has sinned against her. She of course means that she, Lae'zel, has followed protocol to a T, or so she thinks, while Vlaakith, if she truly does consume the Ascended, isn't following those protocols. It seems that this version of Lae'zel is now beginning to separate Vlaakith and the protocol, allowing the two to exist separately. This is a really interesting development of her character, and I'd say this probably concludes Act 1 and brings it to the midpoint of Act 2 within Lae'zel's story. She's developed amazingly in either route, and her story thus far has been great. That's thanks to the excellent personal setup that she gets, along with having an entire area of the game dedicated pretty much solely to her. We also lauded the handling of how trauma and upbringing help form the core of a person, and Lae'zel overall, going into the second half of her story, is primed for either a really tragic story or a really great redemption. Let's continue. Act 2 in regards to Lae'zel is actually pretty empty. I suppose that is the consequence of having an entire section of the game for you and being given a lot of development time for your character, though. She herself only has one story beat that helps progress her narrative if you don't romance her. The party can find yet another Githyanki slate hidden within Moonrise. On it, another part of a story retelling the fall of Orpheus, mentioning that Kith'rak Voss personally killed Orpheus, but that secretly Orpheus is still alive. Lae'zel remarks that this is impossible. There's no way he could still be alive, right? Outside of this, if you choose to romance Lae'zel, you will get an absolutely amazing cutscene here. What Lae'zel says to the player here is just beautiful, and it feels so great seeing her character go from what she was all the way in Act 1 to her opening up and confessing her desire to be something more with you. Lae'zel tells you that despite her god forsaking her, her own people wanting to kill her, that we are the thing her mind keeps focusing on. She never wanted us to be the thing she thought most about, as she says. And yet, every morning she wakes up, and every night she goes to sleep, it's our face that she sees. She then wonders to herself, are we worthy? Worthy of what exactly? Worthy of her looking for the first time in her life at something other than devotion to her protocol. Lae'zel is wondering if love, despite her not calling it that, is something she should give her attention towards. She fears it because she might lose who she once was, but that's why she asks if we're worthy. For her, this would be something that she's never done before. To turn her back from something that she never thought she could turn her back to, and turn to face something new. She invites us to fight her and prove if we are worthy. And, well, of course this is how Lae'zel wants to define if this is love or not. Combat, a test of strength. All she's ever known versus a feeling she's never known. Which one is going to win out? It's brilliant writing. This fight can go two ways. If you beat Lae'zel, she will yield. Your strength was stronger than hers. Your strength has beaten what she thought was unbeatable. Vlaakith's law, Vlaakith's code. Her submission comes from your domination, and she deems you worthy of her. This outcome fully pales in comparison to if she wins, however. If Lae'zel beats the player, she'll stop herself, unable to commit any further pain. She picks the player up, and it's clear that despite Lae'zel winning the physical battle, she has lost the spiritual one within her. Ultimately, love won. Despite all the suffering that she's inflicted and enjoyed, she tells you that she doesn't want to hurt you. No, she wants to protect you. Lae'zel's character arc makes a big leap here. And this is why I say that this is one of the better narrative outcomes, because just wow. Lae'zel was once defined by her selfish nature, and here she is, caring for someone else. She always valued her strength and her strict regime of protocols, but again, here she is, following something she wants. This romance is so unique too, because if you suggest that saying I love you is what Lae'zel wanted to hear, she'll hilariously say no and suggest that you fight her. It's very uniquely Lae'zel and is a great callback to her culture. She hasn't forgotten suddenly all of her upbringing or her core traits, and for all we know, this is just how Githyanki express love. This is simply amazing, and I remember seeing this when I romanced Lae'zel and having a huge grin on my face. She grew on me, and seeing this big fighter, warrior, tough killer of Kalir, now expressing that she can't fight her feelings for us, was great. Her bruising you and you bruising her is certainly an odd way of expressing love, but it's a language that you both understand. And again, it's just how Lae'zel processes what she's feeling. This is how she expresses her love. And that is it for Lae'zel's unique story in Act 2, so just as fast as we entered Act 2, we now head to Act 3. And right at the top of Act 3, we are taken to when the party gets assaulted by the Gith, before the Emperor pulls us into the Astral Prism. And now we've begun the descent towards the climax for Lae'zel. Of course, Lae'zel's not fully done growing yet, and certainly hasn't accomplished her goal of either meeting Voss or appeasing Vlaakith. But this is the catalyst for either of those. The Emperor tells us that the Githyanki in the orb is in fact Orpheus. If Lae'zel has gone down her Vlaakith route, she'll say that her people would never be swayed by this false prince. Again, Lae'zel refuses to see what's right in front of her. We then get the chance to talk with Lae'zel on finding Orpheus alive. Her paths again dictate her responses. Vlaakith Lae'zel calls Orpheus a traitor and retells us the story that Vlaakith was named Queen by Mother Gith. She points out that Orpheus is being controlled by a mind flayer, and as such, Freeing him would only lead her people back to Mind Flayer Dominion. She says that she won't be abandoning 10,000 protocols over one sovereign secret. Lae'zel vows to slay Orpheus once she's found the means to break him free. In the Orpheus Lae'zel timeline, she says that just seeing Orpheus alive is enough to prove that Kith'rak Voss was right, and to prove that Vlaakith's dominion was a lie. She doesn't outright commit to freeing Orpheus yet, but does state that any future for the Gith people free from Vlaakith's lies will only occur if Orpheus is freed. Either way you go here, you get pointed to Lae'zel's new outer goal: either kill or free Orpheus. She does a great job adding the weight to this secret by stating that freeing Orpheus would incur a rebellion against Vlaakith, and killing him would stop insurgents and liars from attempting to sow discord. This is a proper setup and a pretty big reveal for Lae'zel here, and having this outer goal tie nicely in with the current inner conflict Lae'zel is undergoing is perfection. Will Lae'zel live her own life, be her own person? Will she free Orpheus, or will she kill him? Will she be the spark of the new age for the Gith people, or stop rebellion from ever sprouting against her queen? All big final conflicts, fitting for a third act. Moving on to the next stage of her story arc, Lae'zel and the party can then meet at Sharess's Caress, and regardless if Voss is there or not, Raphael will deliver to you an offer. Raphael offers to give you and Lae'zel the very means to free Orpheus himself. He offers you the Orphic Hammer, which, when used on the chains within the Astral Prism, will break him free. Notice here that either version of Lae'zel will tell us to take the deal. That's a far cry from Act 1 Lae'zel, where she scolds the player for wanting to even listen to Raphael's offer, or hell, even the Dream Visitor. This version of Lae'zel is a bit different. Not in regards to her pragmatism. No, in fact, why not take the deal right here? It would solve the problem for Lae'zel. No, Lae'zel here is simply more desperate than she's ever been. Desperate to prove her faith to Vlaakith, desperate to free Orpheus and liberate her people from the same lies that she herself endured. Both paths offer her redemption in Lae'zel's eyes. She's made many mistakes, so right here in front of her is the chance to finally do something right again. Vlaakith's final task for Lae'zel was to kill Orpheus in the prison, and this is either her final defiant act to her queen, or truly her redemption. Let's move on to the finale of this story then, shall we? On a long rest, shortly after our meeting with Raphael, we are visited by an astral projection of Vlaakith. This is perhaps the biggest choice Lae'zel must make within the game for her, the biggest of her entire life. Regardless of which path Lae'zel has taken thus far, Tav can convince her to choose the opposite path at this point. But not only do you have to pass a check, but the game itself tells you which way Lae'zel is leaning during Vlaakith's proposition to kill Orpheus, which I like. It maintains the agency for Lae'zel, but I guess still allows for a little player flexibility, which, since this is a game, I won't necessarily knock. Anyway, Vlaakith promises to make Lae'zel her chosen and ascend her, which is a huge honor, if not the biggest. All she has to do? Kill Orpheus. This is a beautiful crossroads and a beautiful moment for her final curve within her arc. If Lae'zel sides with Vlaakith, she'll swear that she will finish the mission, promising to kill Orpheus, and hopes to win Vlaakith's favor once more. In this timeline, Lae'zel unfortunately was never actually able to break free of the denial stage of grief, and her cycle continues. She is never able to look past the obvious signs in front of her. The Vlaakith indoctrination wins out, and with this choice, Lae'zel's character takes a very tragic turn. Even we, the player, get the chance to probe Vlaakith's mind, only to realize that Vlaakith fully does intend to consume and kill Lae'zel, but it doesn't matter. She takes this mission on, and is successfully manipulated by Vlaakith's promise of ascension. Seeing Lae'zel so hopeful, so full of pride in being given another chance, is a really sad thing. And as we deviate more and more into this timeline, you're probably starting to see why her romance doesn't work as well in this timeline. Lae'zel, prior to being labeled a traitor to her people, was actually growing as a person. But after she was punished for failing her mission, Lae'zel so obviously regresses further into her indoctrination, and it makes little sense for her to still be willing to love someone, since in this timeline, her character flaw of living for someone else, and not herself, never gets resolved, and instead, she opts to follow Vlaakith blindly. I understand the writers can't account for everything, but her romance truly doesn't work in this timeline since she now fully commits to her goal. If she broke things off with the player, as harsh as that would be, It would actually work, in my opinion, to solidify this tragedy further. Lae'zel doesn't have time for anything but redeeming herself in Vlaakith's eyes. It's sort of obvious that the Orpheus Lae'zel timeline by this point makes far more cohesive narrative sense, and if you don't believe me, let's review the Orpheus scene of when this happens, and see just how much tighter narratively it is. In the Orpheus timeline, Lae'zel greets Vlaakith with spite. Lae'zel calls Vlaakith out for her lies as well, which alone is a lot of character growth for her, considering she once heralded Vlaakith as her entire life. But what comes next is just a perfect example of how to do a character arc. When Vlaakith makes her offer to Lae'zel, Lae'zel tells Vlaakith that she gave her life and her faith, and was labeled a traitor. She says, and I quote, "I have witnessed too much, and you have offered too little. Finally, I see. Orpheus will live. This is my word." And that is just amazing. Lae'zel summarizes her character flaw and her character transformation here wonderfully, so I don't really need to say much here on the explanation front. She's right. Lae'zel has transformed into her own person now. She lives by her own words, not Vlaakith's. This is just further hammered home when you debrief with Lae'zel after, which she'll say that despite never being able to fulfill her dreams of soaring over the astral sea, that, quote, "It's better a short life built on truth than immortality woven of lies." And you also get a chance to connect to Lae'zel's tadpole to explain why she might feel so bitter. The narrator will then basically point out to you Lae'zel's arc, citing that Lae'zel's entire life has been uprooted and that she is mourning who she once was. I'm not a personal fan of this because moments later, Lae'zel cites that she was once a fool and that the new person she has become makes her own choices and that freeing Orpheus is freeing herself. And that's all fine, but why did we need the narrator to tell us this? Couldn't they have this moment just have also been exposited by Lae'zel? Bear in mind, if you chose not to romance her, this is kind of the closing statement on her inner arc, and in my opinion, while it's good that she recognized the problem, it's a bit flat. Show, don't tell. Speaking of which, her final romance scene fixes this problem incredibly. First of all, I just want to say something. I made a mistake and I purposely left it in. Seeing as I've only seen this romance play out in my playthrough where Lae'zel frees Orpheus, I was literally stunned to see that if you have Lae'zel stand by Vlaakith, she will, in fact, leave the player and break things off. Wow. I don't have to make a habit of cursing in my content, but holy shit, they really did account for everything. If Lae'zel decides to stand by Vlaakith, you'll still get the sunrise scene that starts out more or less the same, and Lae'zel will tell you that she used to only see death black and blood red, but through us, was able to see all the colors in between. But, as hard as it is for her to say, we ultimately are a distraction to her. She tells us that she belongs to Vlaakith, and the relationship cannot exist at the same time. Lae'zel assures us that it's better this way, before walking away, but not before turning around one last time and calling us the source of her bruises. Wow, okay, applause. Genuinely. I still think, narratively speaking, this isn't as good as the alternate timeline, but I really am happy that Larian had Lae'zel do this. She's always been a high agency character in this game, and the fact that she does this is very realistic for her. They don't necessarily throw away all of the character growth she had either, since she does tell you this, and it's clear that she knows she has to let this go to get her god's favor back, and that perhaps loving you might have been partially the reason why she was banished in the first place. Now, she doesn't scold you for that, but she very well could have. Larian could have written this as a messier breakup where Lae'zel's anger erupts and she lashes out at the player, but I think this way is better. We know she's making a mistake, and she struggles to tell the player how hard letting go of this is, but ending it like this, somber and slow, adds to Lae'zel's tragedy and fall in one of her endings. If the player hates Lae'zel due to the messy breakup, then who cares? But if the relationship ends like this, then maybe there is a chance to get Lae'zel back, or at least that's what the player would think. Maybe there's a chance to save her from herself. It sets up one final fork in the road for Tav if they choose love over ultimately saving the world, since the player then might opt to save Orpheus instead of killing him, and even if that means Lae'zel will hate them, at least she'll get to live. It's wonderful stuff, really. In the Orpheus timeline, Lae'zel and you sit on the same rooftop, and while the scene starts the same, it certainly doesn't end the same. Lae'zel will ask you to look at the sun, and will share what she sees. Lae'zel says that looking at the sun reminds her of how she first hated Faerun and wanted nothing more than to leave and go back home. She says that now she feels differently, that she revels in this place, that she revels in us. She cites that we showed her the duality and balance in life, and that most importantly, we showed her freedom. In the next part, she doesn't know how to say it, what to call it, but she asks that when all of this is over, if we'd stay with her. Assuming the player says yes, she'll call you, quote, the source of my joy, and the scene ends. The obvious subtext here is that Lae'zel loves you, but this scene is an amazing capstone to evolve Lae'zel. She is still a warrior, still a fierce and very pragmatic person, but she's also loving, enjoys nature, is caring, is afraid, and most importantly, is free. She is her own person because she now has a choice, whereas before, there was only a code. Look, either way you approach Lae'zel's romance, I'm really glad that Larian actually had the balls to have her leave you for her goals. It wouldn't have made any sense if she stayed, so I don't actually have really any complaints here. They've set up the plate for her final bow in this timeline. As for the other timeline, also no complaints. It makes a lot of sense for her motivation to continue your relationship, since she, as we just discussed, now has a choice. She wants to love you. Let's finish her story up. After failing to stop the Elder Brain on our first attempt, we end up in the astral plane and in front of Orpheus, and here is where the routes begin. If you don't, or do have the Orphic Hammer, but allow either Karlach, yourself, or the Emperor to assimilate Orpheus, and Lae'zel either wants to kill Orpheus or save him, failing to pass a very hard roll will result in Lae'zel turning against the entire party and fighting you all, which probably leads to her death. This makes a lot of sense. This is her biggest goal. She should be willing to die for it either way. If you don't have the hammer, I believe letting Orpheus be assimilated is slightly an easier check to pass to convince Lae'zel not to revolt, but she will still attempt to. If you have the hammer and free Orpheus and Lae'zel wants to kill Orpheus, she'll spite him, and you then have a few dialogue options. If you kill Orpheus right then and there, well, obviously you all die moments later due to no protection from the Mind Flayer parasite. Two options can convince Lae'zel to stand down for now and kill Orpheus later. And the final option is for the greater good, where you'll have to just kill Lae'zel because Orpheus is the only one capable of stopping the brain. I like the fact that despite you probably being over 100 hours into the game at this point, and possibly in a romance, Lae'zel will still stand on her goals and leave the party, attempting to kill everyone for a chance to either redeem herself through Vlaakith's eyes or give her people a chance at a new era. It's once again very true to Lae'zel's core character, a relentless pursuer of goals. If you, however, chose to have Orpheus saved, and Lae'zel wants to save him too, then we get the option to once again have either Tav, Karlach, or Orpheus turn into a Mind Flayer. Lae'zel won't revolt against the party if Orpheus becomes a Mind Flayer, but she won't be happy either. Assuming Orpheus doesn't become one, an ending Lae'zel has access to is riding off with Orpheus to begin the revolution. If you are a Gith, you can join them. If Orpheus does become a Mind Flayer, he'll ask for his death or exile. Or if you had Vlaakith Lae'zel wait, that's when she'll kill him. There is a lot of variations here on what Lae'zel can be doing by the end of the game, as you can see, but the main ones are pretty straightforward, so I'm going to review the biggest endings. First is the timeline where Lae'zel returns to the astral plane and back to Vlaakith, having fulfilled her mission. In this ending, Lae'zel, unknowingly, happy, prideful even, walks into Vlaakith's chambers and comes face to face with the Lich Queen. All around her are these really creepy husk-looking Githyanki, drained of life. Vlaakith gives a devilish smile, and as the door slams, Lae'zel is consumed. The tragedy complete. Another mighty Githyanki has fallen to the lies, to the protocol, to the creed. As far as a proper ending goes, this works. If to you it feels a bit empty and sad, then I'd say it should. There is such a thing as a tragic ending in storytelling, and it's usually a reverse character arc and a reverse plotline. And again, this is usually how it goes. Nothing good comes from a character who refuses to heal their wound, that refuses to change, and that refuses to grow. This ending is creepy, sad, and a real reality on the power of cult hive minds, and how hard it truly is to break out of that mold. How hard it is to break out of the indoctrination. Lae'zel's other main ending involves some version of her riding off to start the revolution against Vlaakith and the Empire. For me, this fits her narrative arc better. After accomplishing her outer goal, logically, another goal is needed, and here it is. And of course, what's bigger than freeing the son of Mother Gith? Well, naturally bringing down the false queen, who consorted against Mother Gith and taking down an empire. It's a great capstone to her story arc. Shout out to the evil ending, by the way, which has Lae'zel take over the world using the Absolute and then attack Vlaakith just to take over her empire. That's just a really cool ending, and honestly can kind of work for Lae'zel too. I remember when I played as a Githyanki sorcerer dirge and romanced Lae'zel, seeing that sunrise ending, getting to interact with her through the story, watching this character who I don't think I appreciated as much as I did after finishing that playthrough. Lae'zel is a fantastic character, and her writing has very little that I can complain about, truly. It's fairly clear that Larian knew what her arc either was or wasn't going to be, and I think that they did a great job building that arc for us, the player, to experience. From giving us a long character baseline of who she was at the start, to providing an extremely interesting questline for her to follow along, and not just a questline, but a questline that forces her to either accept change in her life, acknowledging her flaws, and changing, or doubling down on what she knows, and for that, paying the ultimate price. She is a great example of a struggle that many of us in humanity deal with too. The fear of insignificance, sure, but there is a bit more than just that. It's the fear of change, and the fear of growth. The fear that we might never be the person that we once were. The fear of not recognizing the new you. Everyone in life will ultimately fail at big things that they're hoping to accomplish in life, and in those moments of failure, moments where you aren't where you thought you'd be, you may find yourself depressed, beaten, tired, or lost. For some, they find a way to pick themselves back up and go and try again at that same goal. For others, they stay down a while and think about all the pain that they're feeling, and in the pursuit of his dream, they are now sitting there suffering. Those people might then sit back up and decide that the suffering is worth it if the dream is accomplished, while others decide that this pain isn't worth it. They aren't even happy. That there is another path, and the one that I'm on now simply isn't it. Thanks for watching, everybody. This video took a long time to write and was a total of 23 pages long, which now is a channel record. I want to say a big thank you to all the content creators in the description for posting their gameplay, but an even bigger thank you to Orcish Gaming for again posting all of Lae'zel's dialogue for the Vlaakith and Orpheus timelines. I'd also like to thank you all for the support on this channel. We are at over 30,000 views on my will analysis video and over 13,000 on my 3 acts of Baldur's Gate 3 analysis. We've also eclipsed 421 subscribers, so thank you so very much. As someone who thought he'd have to walk away from writing, storytelling, and content creation, thank you all for making me feel like this could be something for me to put just a bit more time into and possibly build something very real here. If you folks like this video, please leave a like, and if you like analysis content, please consider subscribing, because there's a lot more where that came from. Until my next analysis video, everybody, take care of yourself, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye-bye.